So we have a hypothesis that their model suggests that different animal groups are not related to each other through common ancestry, common descent. That leads to predictions, like we've seen before with the scientific method, that you can do DNA sequencing to compare how these different organisms relate to one another at the genomic level. And the prediction should be that we will see evidence of independent creation when we do that. And as we've already seen with the young Earth creationist approach, that when you do this and do DNA sequencing and compare the genomes of different organisms, that in fact that hypothesis of independent creation is not supported. However, the hypothesis of common descent is supported. And especially in this notion of these shared errors that we mentioned before, pseudogenes, so the remnants of genes that are the remnants of genes that were clearly once functional but now no longer are, yet are found in the same places in different organisms, same places in the genome in different organisms. Okay, so what would the old Earth creationist response be? Well, again, we're going to see a lot of congruence with the young Earth creationist response. Typically, the old Earth creationist community, this is coming from Reasons to Believe, they tend to emphasize what they perceive as differences. Say in human-chimpanzee sequence comparisons, they tend to focus on what they see as the differences and intend to maximize the perceived genetic similarity between the two organisms. So, and we'll see in a second here how our friend Todd Wood, the young Earth creationist, has actually interacted with, this is from Faz Rana. We can see how he's interacted with Rana's interpretation and said that it's not adequate, and that's actually coming from a young Earth creationist perspective. In terms of the pseudogene issue, you will search, you'll have to search quite a bit before you see a thoughtful interaction on the pseudogene issue from Reasons to Believe. I've done some digging around, haven't really found a satisfactory answer yet. My conclusion is that they're mostly not talking about the issue with their constituents, at least not in a public way on their website. Okay, so here's another quote from Reasons to Believe from Rana. It says, even though many evolutionary biologists consider the 99 genetic similarity between humans and chimps as a profound truth, it turns out to be largely useless information. The genetic similarity between humans and chimps doesn't explain why there is such a fundamental biological and behavioral difference between us and these creatures. Now, I would argue that this is a little bit of a confusion, of ideas here. The fact that humans and chimps have 99% correspondence genomically between one another is certainly not useless information. It's certainly quite useful. It actually gives us some ideas about what makes us human in terms of how the differences work. Small differences could have a large effect. So in some ways, I would argue that Rana is confusing the categories here. Okay. And like I just mentioned, Todd Wood has taken issue with some previous work by Rana in terms of his understanding of how this plays out. This is from the paper that was assigned to you to read for today, so you're familiar with it. He says, creationists tend to emphasize differences between the human and chimpanzee genomes, including different chromosome numbers, etc., differences in gene expression. Differences are certainly important. There are many differences between the two genomes. However, emphasizing these differences does not resolve the problem of similarity. Even if the chimpanzee genome were more than 5 or 10% different from the human genome, the differences are still vastly outnumbered by the similarities. The major pattern that requires explanation is the surprising degree of genomic similarity. And he goes on in that very well written and very thoughtful paper to explore from his perspective, as we've seen in the past, how you can put this correspondence genomically together from a creationist perspective with the presuppositions that they hold. Okay, so let's have a quick analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of Old Earth creationism as a model. Well, like we've seen before with young Earth creationism, they hold to a very high commitment of Scripture in terms of its authority and inerrancy. So that's a strength. They have some support among North American Protestants, tends to be individuals who are more highly educated than, say, the young Earth creationist perspective. The young Earth creationist perspective has a lot more grassroots sort of person in the pew appeal. Old-Earth Creationism is kind of, you might say, if you wanted to sort of use old language to say a sort of the thinking man's creationism, to use sort of 1950s language. Another strength that they have, I would see it as a strength, detractors would not, is that they're not typically interested in the warfare model, the culture warfare aspect of this discussion. They actually see their ministry as a ministry that reaches out to scientists, to working scientists, and as such, they are hoping to relate to that community in an appropriate manner. Now, they certainly do that from the geological sciences and the chemistry side and physics and such, astronomy and cosmology. However, it seems to me that it kind of goes off the rails once they start talking about biology, because now they're into this sort of mode that is disputing what the science is telling us. Okay. Unfortunately, despite these despite these strengths, the key weakness, as we've seen before with young-Earth creationism, is that in terms of the anti-evolutionary hypotheses that Old-Earth creationism generates, there has not, as of yet, been any scientific empirical support for those hypotheses. Which is not to say that there couldn't be in the future, but at present it doesn't seem to be panning out that way. Feel free to flag me down for questions and comments along the way too, that's fine. Okay, moving on to intelligent design, and we'll spend more time on intelligent design because it's something that's garnered a lot more public exposure, and it's something that you've heard about probably a lot more. Maybe just in terms of a straw poll, who in the class has sort of encountered Old-Earth creationism as an interaction model? Yeah, sort of, okay. Young-Earth creationism, I assume most of us have sort of come across that. I mean before the class, certainly you've seen it now. But intelligent design, you sort of heard that in terms of before you came to the class. Yeah, so more, seems like it's more prevalent in our culture in terms of the airtime that it gets. Okay, so intelligent design has been around since the mid to late 80s or so. It didn't really get off the ground in a large way until it was picked up by a fellow named Philip Johnson, who's a professor emeritus of law at Berkeley. He wrote a book in 1991 called Darwin on Trial, which I remember reading and thinking was brilliant at the time as an undergraduate. That was followed on in 1996 by Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box, which I read as an early grad student and similarly thought was stellar. I can remember seeing a poster tacked to the bulletin board at UBC by one of the professors there, not a professor who I had personally, but it was a caricature of Behe's work and sort of posted up in a mocking tone. And I thought, these atheistic professors suppressing the truth. So whatever happened to me, right? Anyway, okay. So what's the key? If you've seen the Dover Kitzmiller video that I assigned, there's that very nice section where Philip Johnson is discussing what he sees as the key intelligent design propositions. And among those is that certain features of living organisms are best explained as the action of an intelligent designer. That biological structures have what is called irreducible complexity. What is meant by that is you cannot take a piece of that, of a structure away and have it function. So it's irreducible if you can't remove any portion of it and have it function. The argument is not so much that these entities exist in biology, because they certainly do. That's actually the basis for studying things through mutagenesis. You break it, you see what happens when it's missing. So the argument is not so much that irreducibly complex things exist in biology. The argument is that irreducibly complex entities cannot evolve. They cannot be exapted, which is a technical term, from other biological entities. Maybe let's just talk for a second about what exaptation is. It's a good word for Scrabble. It's got an X, so put it in your toolkit for Scrabulous on Facebook, or if they still let you do that and such. Okay. To exact something is to